Hello, I'm Robert Peston and welcome to Now What, my new series in which we explore the big challenges facing this country and the world. And I'm delighted to be joined by NIGEL FARAGE, former leader of UKIP, now a broadcaster, but still intimately involved in what's going on in this country. I'd like to actually start with the biggest thing you're associated with, which is Brexit. I was with you at on that famous night for a little bit. I was sort of travelling around London, seeing the various campaigns, reporting on them on the night of June 23rd, 24th, 2016, when the votes were being counted. There was your huge, boisterous party at the top of Millbank Tower, or a tower in Millbank, on the river. It felt, I think, to you like the biggest moment of your life. You won the vote that you've been campaigning for literally all your political life. But Brexit, it's not really going all that well, is it?
Terrible. Shocking. It's appalling. I mean, now what? I mean, it's very aptly named for Brexit, isn't it? I mean, look, it was a huge shock to the body politic, Brexit. And of course, it's met with resistance. But the real problem here is a complete lack of leadership, because the way I view it, Brexit was an instruction from the people to our government to turn around the ship of state by 180 degrees and to start sailing in a different direction. And to do that, with all the criticism you're going to face, with all the vested interests that will lobby against it, you need somebody at the top, a leader, who actually believes in what they're doing. And the fundamental problem is we've got this Prime Minister, who I think is probably the least sincere, weakest Prime Minister I've seen in my lifetime, doing a job she clearly does not, in her heart and soul, believe in.
But do you yourself, though, feel any personal responsibility? I mean, one of the criticisms made of the people campaigning to leave is you didn't exactly endow a government with a blueprint for how to do it. Shouldn't you have been a bit more...
I've said from the start, I've said from the start that I would love to help in any way with the Brexit process. I mean, the snobby Tory party won't even talk to me. I mean, you know, they are so close-minded about me. I mean, this is incredible. You know, when I went to meet Trump, just 3 days after he'd won the election, he was about to become president. Just 3 days after that, I sat down with Trump for an hour, spoke to him. I wasn't even asked for a debrief by the Foreign Office or the government. They want nothing to do with me. So I thought for the week after the referendum, if I could play a constructive role in any way in the Brexit process, I'd love to have done it.
But did you think, I mean, obviously you concentrated an enormous amount on the campaign. But did you think at all in the years and months, you know, leading up to the actual vote about the detail of how we get
out? I thought about a strategy for how we should pursue Brexit, of course.
So what have they done wrong?
And I wrote about it. Well, look, there are two Europes. One is the Europe of Brussels, the one of, you know, the unelected old men, the Barniers, the Junckers. That's one Europe. The other Europe are the member states. And what we should have done from day one is we should have had delegations going out to all of the European countries. We should have been in Munich, visiting BMW factories. We should have been in Champagne, visiting all the sparkling winemakers. We should have been out there pushing our message that Brexit is not about us pulling up the drawbridge. It's not about us not wishing to be friends. It's not about us not wanting to trade. And getting them to put more pressure on their MEPs, on their prime ministers, on their presidents, and directly onto the European Commission. We should have stolen the initiative on this. We should have made the argument that actually continuing with a free trade deal was very much in the interests of Europe. We did none of that.
Should we have triggered Article 50 when we did?
Well, it took her 9 months to trigger Article 50. Now, of course, Cameron told us he'd trigger Article 50 the very next day. But of course, we learned...
What would you have done?
Well, I think the biggest shock of the lot was to find out that there had been absolutely no contingency plan made within government circles for a Brexit vote, and therefore it couldn't be triggered the next day. Clearly, it would take a few months for some plan to emerge. But ever since that moment, all we've seen is a continual kicking of the can down the road. And we're now at a point where the very best outcome from a Leaver's perspective is that we leave the treaties at 11 p.m. on March the 29th next year, but stay so wrapped up in everything through transition that it will be at least 6 or 7 years before we can reap any of the benefits of Brexit.
So I just want to explore what you mean by 6 or 7 years. Does that mean you don't believe that transition will only last till, you know, the end of 2000?
Oh, if she's still in power, transition will last for 10 years. You know, I mean, they're not prepared to face up to this, are they? I mean, it's as if through our career political class and through the civil service in particular, they're totally risk averse. It's as if everything as it is now should stay as it is. You know, change is bad. Well, you know, I come from the world of business. I view change as opportunity. I view change as being quite exciting, but no one does. So I'm worried.
But lots of business are putting pressure on
Well, of course they are. Of course they are.
Take it gently, not to do it.
Of course they are. Look, capitalism went out of the window years ago. We now live in an age of global corporatism. We live in an age where a handful of big companies virtually own the political class and within the European Union, the lawmaking process. You know, you've never seen big companies happier with any political creation than the European Union. It's fabulous. You know, they write the rules for their own industry. They're able to stop small and medium-sized competitors coming in and competing. So of course they're going to fight their corner. Of course they're going to argue for their interests. That's where it takes a Prime Minister of conviction and strength to say, look, this is happening. Adapt, adjust. It's very interesting.
But I just want to sort of, though, explore some of this. Before the Brexit vote, we were the fastest growing economy in Europe. We were one of the more successful developed economies. Since that vote, we've been bumping along at 1.5%, 1% growth at the moment. The rest of Europe is growing at twice that. America is growing at almost 4%. The world is growing at almost 4%. What's gone wrong?
Well, look at productivity in our country. Productivity is a major problem.
It is a major problem, but we had that problem before the Brexit vote.
Well, when you become the
so what I'm saying is,
well, when you become the cheap labour capital,
appears,
when you become the cheap labour capital of Europe, it's not surprising that productivity falls in the way that it does. But of course, that's not a comparison.
No, but I just
make.
want to be clear. You're saying that there is no connection between our move from being the better performing economy to the worst performing economy. There's no connection between that and the Brexit vote.
I think the fact that you go for a transition period, I think the fact that you try and extend that transition period, I think the message to investors is we ourselves haven't got a clue exactly where we're going. So I think we've actually caused...
There's an enormous amount of uncertainty, as you say.
Businesses
don't like uncertainty.
Well, the longer...
They're not investing. You know, they're not hiring in the way they should be. So...
Well, hang on. 1,000 new jobs a day have been created every day in this country since the referendum result. So,
but as you yourself, pointed out, a lot
of them are cheap labour. A lot of them are cheap labour jobs. No. I mean, they are. But you know, when I talk to entrepreneurs, they say very simply, just tell us what the deal is. We'll adapt and get on with it. This uncertainty, and there is now uncertainty, there is now overseas investment uncertainty, is being caused by a government that is not simply getting on with it. And, you know, all the talk of cliff edges and all the rest of it, I mean, the truth of it is, even if we have to adapt to a tariff regime, that's not the end of the world.
No, I mean, but as you say, the problem is, it is a lack of certainty. If you were sitting in number 10 now, what would you do?
I sat down about 10 days before the referendum with a group of economists. You would know all of them. Some of the best known names in the country. And they were all keen, mostly free marketeers, keen for us to embrace Brexit, keen for us to go global. Some of them were unilateral free traders, etc. But it was becoming clear as the referendum approached that the rational argument that, of course, the European Union will offer us continued free trade because they sell us so much more than we sell them wouldn't necessarily be the case. How do we deal with this? And I sat for 2 or 3 hours with these guys and we came up with the slogan, no deal is better than a bad deal. And I went out and started to use that in the last 10 days of the campaign. The Prime Minister did eventually pick up on that slogan, but never, ever, meant it. And the great thing...
I mean, because the point... no deal might be better than a bad deal, but only in the circumstances where you are, building lorry parks so that, if there do have to be more customs checks, they can happen.
Look,
where you change... That no preparations have been made.
The point I'm making is this, that anybody that's worked in the private sector, which, of course, is hardly anybody in politics these days, anyone that's worked in the private sector knows, if you and I... have a relationship, I'm buying product off you, but actually, Robert, do you know what? Your deliveries have been a bit sloppy lately, and there's a couple of boys down the road selling stuff more cheaply than you, and all right, we've had a relationship for the last 30 years, but I really do need to seriously talk to you about this, and I'm your biggest client. Your biggest fear is that I say, well, the hell with it, and walk out of the door, and you will do everything you can to stop me walking out of that door. That is how negotiations happen. The other side has to know you're serious about walking away. And the problem with this is...
the no deal threat never looked credible.
Not with this Prime Minister, no.
That's what I'm saying.
No, I would agree with that,
but
that's why...
But if you were, that we get the mother of all political crises, Nigel Farage is somehow transported in some way that I can't quite explain in detail, but you're somehow you find yourself in 10 Downing Street. You are the Prime Minister. Would you say to Brussels, Barnier, the other EU government heads, let's now simply negotiate a rupture, a clean break, March 29, make the best of it?
Well, if the alternative is 40 billion sterling being wrapped up inside, European Union rules, European court judgments, continued free movement of people, and a complete breach of faith with our electorate. You can talk economics, but there's actually an issue here about democracy, about trust in the whole system. Given where we are now, I think to say, look, this really isn't working for us. There's a great big world out there. They were queuing up to talk to us. They've stopped coming recently, you'll notice, because we're not being taken seriously. I mean, the Americans now do not take us seriously, for example.
What do we do? I'm just trying to
But if you go to Southampton...
Because we're so close
If you go to Southampton or Felixstowe right now, you will see vast containers on these new ocean-going vessels. Containers coming in from China, containers coming in from countries all over the world with whom we do not have membership of a customs union or a tariff-free trade. And do you know what? Those containers come off those ships, they're on lorries, they're headed towards London or Birmingham or wherever it is, and they're off those boats within minutes. Why? Because there are things called trusted trader schemes. Why? Because actually, we random check very little, if truth be told, of what comes into this country. And given modern technology, even with a tariff regime, this is all very doable.
It may be doable, it's just not doable by the end of March. I mean, there is literally nobody who believes this is doable by the end of March. So the question is, what do we do now?
Failing without a change of leadership. Let me tell you what will happen.
Would you advise the Tory party to get rid of her?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. She's a disaster. I mean, she's boxed herself into a position now where we will, for the foreseeable future, after March the 29th, actually be in a worse position than we were before we voted to leave. It's ludicrous.
So I want to be clear what you're saying. You're saying that where we are in terms of this half in, half out is worse than being in the EU?
Of course. But we're not able to take any of the obvious benefits that could have come from it. I mean...
So why didn't... I'm going to go back to what I said to you before, OK? Why didn't you, the face of Brexit over years, why didn't you deliver a roadmap?
Because they wouldn't use me, they wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah, but why didn't you publicly talk about a roadmap during the campaign?
Oh, because to do that during a campaign, as Alex Salmond learned in the Scottish referendum, deflects everybody away from what the main question is. The main question is, do you vote to stay or remain? Not, if we started to put forward what the alternative plans were, that it would have all got lost in the weeds. It wouldn't have worked. A referendum...
But hang on, but it's given that it's gone, it has, in your view, gone pretty catastrophically badly, that there's a terrible Horlicks made of it. I just want you to go back and just... Look, if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
I argued for an Australian-style point system on immigration, and do you know what they're doing? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, whatever I'd put forward, they wouldn't listen to me anyway. I took the view, I took the view.
Well, the country listened to you, and so.
Well, I'm still doing my job. I'm still leading a group in the European Parliament. I'm still writing, speaking, doing radio shows, coming on programmes like this. I'm still there making arguments, and I will go on making those arguments. But
So I want us to stand back for a second, then, because okay, we are in a mess, no question.
Yep.
What was your vision of what Britain would be like when we were cleanly out of the EU? You campaigned for years to get us out.
Well, number one.
But what is your vision of a? We're definitely not there. But how would you like to see Britain?
One with a reinvigorated democracy. One where actually the things that affected people's lives on a daily basis were debated at general elections, voted on. I genuinely think.
So for you, it was about Parliament more than anything else?
No, not about the people.
Right.
Sovereignty is not in Parliament. Sovereignty is with the people.
Parliament is the representative of the people.
They lent it.
Yeah.
They lent it. And
Sure.
it's about who the bosses are. It's about the country being a self-governing nation, a genuinely democratic country that makes big decisions. And the truth of it is.
So for you,
is
it the? So I just want to. It was the constitutional position more than the economic.
Of course. It is about being a self-governing nation, and frankly, being outside of a failing European Union that is becoming militaristic, expansionist, authoritarian, just not a good place to be. So from every perspective of freedom, of liberty, of democracy, of national identity, from all of those reasons, Brexit's the right choice. Now, it's funny when you talk about economics. The very same people that told me in 1990 that the exchange rate mechanism was the right thing to do when I was working in a city dealing room and thought it was a disaster, were the same people who told us if we didn't join the euro, foreign and direct investment would cease, car making would stop, the whole thing would be... there'd be massive problems in terms of trade with Europe and the rest of the world, are the same people now telling us that Brexit will be a catastrophe. They've been wrong on every single other economic pronouncement they've made, and they're wrong on this. They're wrong on this if we have a government that's actually got the nous to grip this.
I mean, I suppose one respect in which I would want to challenge you here is you'll be aware of this, that about the only industrial policy both the Tory government had in the 1980s and then the Labour government had in the late 90s and onward was to tour the world and say to big international companies, come to the UK as the lower regulation, lower cost entry point for access to the world's biggest market, the European single market. And we are, as a nation, much more dependent on those sorts of multinationals as a result of that campaigning by ministers to get the Nissans and their like to come here than most other industrial nations. Now, it just means, and you are somebody who was in business, you know that when the cost of doing business goes up, there are consequences for businesses in terms of the amount that they invest and the amount that they employ. And so it's not. I'm not saying. I'm not remotely saying that there isn't a complete. I'm not saying there's not a completely
I tell you what is so ludicrous
right,
about this.
Right, go on. Tell me.
All these economic arguments get conducted as if exports from this country to the European Union were the biggest and most important part of the British economy. And everybody has lost the fact that 80% of the British economy doesn't do any overseas trade at all. 80% of the British economy is what goes on within the borders of these islands.
But we are still...
No, let me finish this.
We're a massive service economy and a massive consumer economy. Of course we are. But
for 10% of our economy, 12%, let's call it. 12% of our economy is exporting goods and services to the European Union.
Sure.
And to do that, we're part of a rule book that ties 100% of our economy. And we have found ourselves actually in a position where, along with much of the rest of Europe compared to the world, we've become increasingly competitive. We have put costs up for things like energy, for example, way above way above many of our global competitors.
Yeah, including the rest of the European Union. I mean, the reason energy is so expensive is to do with the governments here, not the rest of the EU.
No, it's to do with EU policy. Blair following the 20-20-20 strategy, all right? And we've done it in line with much of the rest of Europe.
Well, as you know, power is
But
much
I do
cheaper
not want
on most of
I
most
do not
of the
want-
rest of the EU.
I do not want 90% of the British economy governed by a set of rules that are not even relevant to it. Now, you know, I'm a free marketeer. I believe in free market capitalism. I'm sick to death of this global corporatism we're living in. I'm sick to death of a modern world dominated by a handful of big companies who basically own the political system, the rule-making system to their own benefit. I think we can do a damn sight better than that, but we have to have the vision. We have to have somebody at the top leading us that takes us in that direction. So I believe Brexit's the right thing economically too, but only if we're able to have to see the way forward on this.
Okay, so let's look at another aspect of all of this. You, for many years, led a party called the UK Independence Party, and you led it during, by a huge margin, its most successful period. Now, that presumably means that you believe in the UK. And yet one of the things that is, I think, disturbing for many people is that since the Brexit vote, the pressures for the breakup of the UK have increased.
Cobblers. Absolute
Why do you
cobblers.
say that?
You are,
Look at opinion polls in Northern
this
Ireland.
Is yeah, exactly. Look at opinion polls in Northern Ireland, out 2 weeks ago. Now, only 21% of people polled in Northern Ireland support joining the Republic. 21%. It's half what it was a decade ago. So don't give me that. Scottish nationalism. Scottish
we're
nationalism.
not talking about a decade. We're
Scottish
talking about what's
nationalism,
happened over the last
It's 21%. It is at
No.
a modern historic low.
There are also
no.
We're going to
I'm
argue.
not having any of this. I'm not having any of this.
Because
And Scottish nationalism has been poleaxed by Europe. Why? Because a third of SNP voters voted Brexit. If the SNP was genuinely for independence, they might have some chance of breaking up the United Kingdom. But because they're actually European regionalists, they can't. So no, that argument I will not buy into
We're going to disagree
at
with
all.
this. Because look, whatever the position might have been 10 years ago, there is, just go to the border. I don't know if you've been to the border. Yeah. There are people there who are deeply anxious.
Well, of course
about
they are. They're being made anxious.
Right. So,
but look at that border today. Different currency, different VAT regime, different income tax rates. There are already huge differences either side of that Irish border. And if you add tariffs to it, if that's what we have to have, it's just one more difference. Now, this has been used shamelessly by Barnier, absolutely shamelessly, and he's found a very useful poodle in Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach. But frankly, these are imagined fears. The United Kingdom is actually more stable than it's been as an entity for many, many years.
Well, many people would hope you're right. I'm not 100% confident that you are right. And I mean, it sounds to me as though you're a bit complacent about it. I mean, we have, a government in Scotland that is committed to having another referendum. And I'm sorry, but whatever you say, when you look at the trends of recent polls, we may not yet have a majority of people saying they want to be part of the Republic, but there is deep anxiety in
It's 21%, and also one of the reasons that Northern Ireland won't join Southern Ireland is because Southern Ireland is in the Euro, and they don't want to join the Euro. No, I'm not concerned about the integrity of the United Kingdom. I'm concerned. I mean, there are lots. I'm concerned about the way Brexit's going. I'm concerned about the House of Lords and their role. I'm concerned about the electoral system we have in this country, which is frankly becoming actually more and more irrelevant to many millions of people. There are lots of things I want to see change in this country, but in terms of the UK holding together, no, not worried.
All right, we're on to UKIP. Does it have a future?
It's up to UKIP, isn't it, really?
Do you have any role there anymore?
No.
I mean, you don't talk to them much, or?
Oh, I talk to them, obviously, but I think, I think if you've been the managing director of a company and you retire, you might come back once a year for a boardroom lunch, but you don't involve yourself in the running of that company. And the worst thing, is former political leaders who want to be backseat drivers or whatever. So I've left it pretty much alone for the last 2 years.
I mean, they appear to be particularly fixating on Islam and the risk, as they see it, of Islamic extremists. Is that the right strategy? It's not what you did.
No, I think if you're worried, concerned about the growth of Islamic extremism, if you're conscious that we've rather turned a blind eye in this country to some of the horrible things that have gone on that should have been gripped and dealt with earlier, I think that's fine. I think if a political party starts to become fixated on Islam as a religion,
which some people would say is
as opposed to
UKIP,
extreme radical jihad, then they are two different things. And if UKIP goes down the path of choosing to be an anti-Islamic political
or an
party,
anti-Muslim party, you would sever all your links with it.
It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, either you believe in religious tolerance and freedom, or you don't.
And I'm asking you would think if they did that, you would not be able to associate.
Well, I hope they won't make that mistake.
Right. Okay, but I'm just sorry to press you on it. But if they were to be seen as that, you could not be associated.
Let's hope. I very much hope that common sense prevails. It's really interesting. What I did as leader of UKIP was I took on a couple of areas that were not allowed for debate in polite society. I think we should leave the European Union. Well, you wouldn't get a second dinner invite. No, but really, because it was mad and bad to even suggest it. And of course, immigration had been a very difficult argument in this country ever since 1968. Ever since Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, even discussing immigration was a very difficult thing to do. And what I tried to do with UKIP, and tried my damnedest to do with UKIP, was to make sure that we did not have extremists within the organisation. I banned anybody who'd ever been a BNP member from even joining the party. I tried to make sure that we could make the arguments, but without being tainted with the extremes. And I would advise UKIP, do not become a party that campaigns on religion, and do not become a party that gives a backdoor in to some very extreme elements. It just won't work.
Tommy Robinson, he's been jailed for contempt of court. Hundreds of thousands. I looked yesterday. More than 600,000 people have now signed a petition calling for his release. What does that tell us about this country?
It tells us that people are getting quite scared. They're getting scared of what's happening in many of their communities. They're getting scared about division. And their lives are being fundamentally changed by bad government policy, by state-sponsored multiculturalism, and people are scared about it. And all they say, and I've spoken to them. I mean, I've spoken to them. All they see Tommy Robinson, a working-class lad, standing up and telling the truth, being put in prison for it. What they don't see is the legal side of the argument.
I mean, you, as you say, were very clear that you did not want UKIP to be seen as a racist or extremist party.
I didn't just want it not to be seen as one, I didn't want it to be one.
Sure, no, absolutely. But are you worried that we are seeing the rise of racism and extremism?
I'm worried that unless we listen to what the voters said in the Brexit referendum, namely that controlling our borders and actually caring about our culture and our identity, unless British governments start to put that very much higher up the agenda, then what comes politically after me, Westminster will find a bigger shock than I was.
Because, there some things that have happened in this country recently are shocking. We had the murder of one Labour MP.
If you wanted to do scores on doors between far-right violence and violence coming from jihadism, I wouldn't play that game if I were.
No, I'm not playing a game. But nonetheless, that must concern you.
Of course.
Violence from any quarter must concern you.
Well, I think that's right, and that's what we should say, absolutely. I'm
just trying to understand what's going on in this country.
Do you know
we
something?
didn't see those. We didn't see anything like that for donkey's years.
All right.
You must think about this. You must
think
what is going on.
I think people are very scared. I also think, it's remarkable, isn't it? The BNP in 2005, 2006 when I first became leader of UKIP, and I'd been chairman and goodness knows what before, but when I first decided, okay, I'm 40 now, I'm a grown up, I'll become the leader of the party. The BNP were bigger than UKIP in terms of electoral results.
Sure.
And a lot of people urged me, Nigel, you've got to merge with the BNP, it's the only way forward. I said, no, we're not going to do that. And in the end, UKIP destroyed the BNP. And we did it by saying to people, look, if you're voting for this because you're really upset about what's happening to your wages, access to the local primary school, all those things, but you don't like the hate-filled agenda, vote for me, not for them. And we knocked their legs out from under them. Maybe me not being there and not talking about these things in the way that I was for a decade and more has perhaps allowed space for things to move further to the right and perhaps in a more extreme direction. And this is something you would have thought that the Conservative Party, you would have thought they, of the parties, would have taken this agenda, and yet they don't appear to want to.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I just want to talk a little bit about what happens now to Nigel Farage. Actually, there was one question I wanted to ask you, actually, just before we get on to that, which is, was there an individual at any point in your life who was a sort of hero or a bigger influence on you than anybody else? If if you have to think about, particularly when it comes to your political life, is there anybody you think of as a hero or a big influence?
Oh, I think on the European question, I think Powell and to some extent Tony Benn. I mean, if you look at the arguments that Powell and Benn were making from 72 to 75, that period when we went into the common market and we had a referendum on it, those two were so far ahead of their time in terms of understanding what the European project was, that I've got a pretty high regard for both of them. I really have.
So Tony Benn, Enoch,
and I admired Thatcher
yeah,
for her qualities of leadership. We're going in this direction. You can criticise me all you want, and I admired Blair for just his sheer ability to communicate a message. I mean, I watched him come to the European Parliament at a time when he was deeply unpopular post the Iraq War. And I watched him in 40 minutes turn a chamber that was against him to being on his side. So these are people I've watched who I've thought in their own ways, were, whether you agree with them or not, but were rather brilliant.
I mean, you did say, actually, funnily enough, and just remember this, back in 2014, that in respect of one aspect of what he was doing, you regarded Putin as...
The question was, who on the world stage now
do
you have admiration for? And I said I might not like him, but I think Putin's the most effective.
Do you regret
leader.
saying that?
Well, you can't say he's not effective. He's highly effective.
But he's doing so many terrible things.
Awful. But it doesn't, of course. But that doesn't mean he was. That does not mean that he's not an incredibly clever political operative.
And just to be clear, because these things have been repeatedly thrown at you. Any Russian-linked money go to either UKIP or Leave.eu?
Never. Absolutely not.
You're completely sure that literally...
I'm absolutely completely sure. And I have to say, I think this is just a desperate attempt by the establishment, Remainer lobby, just continually throw lies.
And if Russian bots and troll farms and all the rest of it were in some way interfering or engaging in the referendum campaign, there was no way that was in cahoots with you or any of your colleagues?
They were heavily involved in Corbyn's campaign. There was far more Russian bot activity supporting Jeremy Corbyn than ever took place during the referendum.
Well, I'll talk to Corbyn about that when he comes here. But I just want to be absolutely clear. If it was happening, there was no collusion.
A, there was no collusion, and B, there was no effect. It's just utter nonsense.
So, what is the future for Nigel Farage?
I don't know. I mean, I was somebody that went and worked in the commodities business, which I loved.
I mean, it looks as though years have fallen off you since you've given up office.
Well, they have. I mean, I worked in that. I worked in the 80s in that very exciting world. You know, open outcry markets, all of those things. Lot of fun. Great social life that went with business in those days. I got into politics, but I never thought I'd even stand for local council. I got involved in politics because I felt completely motivated by this issue of what Europe was becoming and where it was going.
And why was that?
Why was that?
Yeah. But what was it about Europe that suddenly made the young Nigel Farage?
It wasn't suddenly. It's the kind of thing that grows year on year on year on year on year. I guess if there was one moment that really did change my life, it was the night we joined the exchange rate mechanism.
Right.
October 1990. I could see it was cretinous, and I found that the Labour Party supported it, the Tory Party supported it, the Lib Dems supported it, the TUC supported it, the CBI supported it, all the newspapers supported it, and I didn't. So I've been campaigning against the world ever since then, really. But it was this issue that motivated me to get into politics. I was more than happy to step down as UKIP leader after the referendum.
But we've got another big moment. Let's go back to where we started. We've got a failing Brexit.
Yeah.
You can't let it fail, can you? How can you? I mean, obviously,
I know
you're doing all this broadcasting, but
yeah.
you can't just stand on the sidelines. You've got to get involved again, haven't you?
If you ask the man in the street, the man and woman in the street right now, they think Brexit's happened already. They don't perceive what the problem is. We do, because we're living inside this world. Now, at some point in time, they will. Look, I will say this. I have no desire to get back in the front line of campaigning politically in this country. I'd rather not do it. I'm enjoying life much more than I was leading that party and doing all the things I did. I mean, they were fun at the time, but I was pleased that it came to an end. I mean, that was over 10 years of 7 days a week of complete dedication to something. I mean, I did it at a fanatical level. I did the best I could. I didn't do badly. I don't want that life again. But if we reach a situation...
But what if your legacy
is
a Horlicks of a Brexit?
If we leave, if on March the 29th next year we leave the treaties, even if it is a bad deal, even if we're in a rotten place, we will historically have left the treaties. We will become a sovereign country with the chance to sort things out. If I see through the House of Commons or whatever it is, Article 50 being delayed or being stopped, I will then have no choice but to throw myself back into the front line of political campaigning. I hope it doesn't happen, but it may.
Well, we're all on tenterhooks. Very nice to see you.
Thank you.
All the best.